It is very cool. So generally speaking today, yeah, we're chatting about applying EthicalOS, which is like an ethical tech ethics framework to Libra. And as a reminder for everybody, we are nearing the end of the semester. And so what that means is we are now at this class 11, applying EthicalOS to Libra. Class 12 is next week. I will not be here, but Neha will be here. And Neha, I think that the
reading list will be up to date maybe a couple hours after this class.
Okay, sweet. I will, once it is, then we'll say this is now official.
Yeah.
But it will not be, it will only be a pared down version of the current version.
Yes,
yeah,
right
so
now I put too many things on. So I have to cut some stuff.
Too much excitement. And then it'll be Thanksgiving, and so everybody will do that if you're into that or not. And then the week after that is the final presentations. So that's, we're at the, we're closing, coming to an end. Is there anything any questions about this, just the end of the class, up and coming? It's likely that we don't have, just because I'll be in Berkeley for the next essentially 2 weeks at a like a blockchain ethics workshop, the same workshop that Neha was at, but for consensus. I will be at a similar workshop, but for like economics and ethics. And yeah, so I think it's unlikely that we have any of the Monday. I think that we will have no more Monday night recitations during these final couple weeks, and then it'll just be this.
On 11/21, are we supposed to like send you our final project?
So
like,
I
can't change over Thanksgiving.
So no. So this is a encouragement to say, hey, the clock is ticking. It's a better idea to be like, look, here's what I have that's pretty darn close to done. I'm trying to, and in fact, it's like only 70% of the way there, or whatever. But you're trying to, I think, just imagining in your. So there's nothing. The only thing you need to send us on 11/21 next week is your normal weekly update. However, if you, we recommend that you imagine it as like, really trying to get into finalization mode. Does that help? So it's more of a mindset and an encouragement than it is a requirement. Any other questions or points? Okay. So today we're going to chat about why Facebook is creating Libra. We're going to look at a technical overview of Libra. We're going to apply EthicalOS to it, and then we will, add some of these additional blockchain-specific ideas to the framework, EthicalOS framework itself, because the EthicalOS framework was made generally without cryptocurrencies and blockchains in mind, and so we'll kind of see where it aligns and where it misaligns. So for why create Libra, first let's just check out the people seen this video? I think it's worth watching it because just a reminder of like why, essentially a reminder of like the unbanked narrative that both Libra and others are trying to push. So let's see.
Remember when these were fast? And these? Technology has improved the world around us. So why is it simple to send one of these anywhere in an instant, but not money? What if we made money truly global, stable, and secure? What if everyone was invited to the global economy with access to the same financial opportunities? Introducing Libra, a new global currency designed for the digital world, backed by the belief that money should be fast for Ope in Lagos, simple for Saul's family business in Manila, and secure for Betsabe when sending money home to Mexico City. It's powered by blockchain, making it safe and accessible, no matter who you are or where you're from. So join us as we move towards a world where money works for everyone.
Maybe on the soundtrack.
This is Libra. It's just Libra.
The knife is coming up over your head again. Wow.
You're saying it sounds like a movie trailer?
Yeah.
Suspense.
My
It's
heart
like,
rate.
someone's gonna die.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's. So, do people have any? When they see that, do people have any initial kind of like thoughts or reactions or feelings besides fear?
I have to say maybe that's human psychology, but they put so much in the video, too much that first people are more engaged in the video, I feel, than what they're saying. So they're just playing around with mental psychology.
It felt like so just so much was going on. Yeah, so it's similar, I guess, comment to like we're expected to feel so secure and connected in something that is it just like the video intuitively just feels very fleeting. You know what I mean? Just like I don't know, it's not clear to me that like Sal even needs what Libra was proposing. You know what I mean? Like I like the stories that they bring up, like did they talk to Sal? Like I would have loved to see somebody actually not just like singing karaoke, but and like, you know, assumption that here's your solution, but like is like an interview. Maybe it's an interview, maybe it's like just actual documentation on why this is justified as a product, which I haven't seen, but maybe it exists.
But definitely not in this video.
Yeah.
I also felt like the energy behind it seemed fast, but I think it was like to maybe mimic like fast markets, like right, money's always like moving hands and changing hands, and it's sort of like this like very chaotic system, and like how do we make sure everyone has access to it? But I definitely do agree with like it seemed more theatrical than like specific. It was very like broad, but like definitely felt like in a very weird way, like
Yeah, totally. I think that's the interesting piece. Well, so it's the things I think about are it's obviously a super high quality video, and it's kind of to some extent like if you look at other videos that like people in the cryptocurrency world make, they're like not as they're like low quality, but like Facebook's a high quality company, or like they do stuff well and they like have a huge UX team or whatever, so like they make high quality stuff. And then also all this global vibe and all those things. I think that there's. But like what they say here, they essentially state the exact same mission that the DCI has, which is to make it as easy to send money around the world, value around the world, as it is to send information. And so we kind of have, like, if the DCI were to have made this video, I would feel proud. You know, right? Like,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is what we're trying to do.
In a different way, but yes.
Yeah, and the devil's in the details, but it is, I think this narrative is a powerful narrative where it's like, wow, look at this global world, you know, and we do want to make it easier for people to send money to each other. So that's the high level. One other final piece is they don't say Facebook at all in the entire video, and then they say blockchain once. They say powered by blockchain. That makes it, I think, safe and accessible are the two adjectives they use there.
I liked the visual.
The rubber bandy thing. Or
Because
whatever that
well,
was.
it implies what? A network.
Yeah.
Which is super.
Yeah, that was
actually,
very well done.
it was, talk about like a high class.
Do you guys
UX,
remember
UI.
this? There was a kid with the
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it implies like nodes on like and I don't know. To me, I'm like, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, and so there's that unbanked narrative is the big one that people push, or that they pushed initially, and then the second one though is so let's just watch. So recently, and again to remind folks, like Libra essentially came out over the summer, and this is I guess just a couple weeks ago there was a hearing where Mark Zuckerberg went in front of the Financial Services Committee, which is part of the U.S. Congress, and he answered questions from them for like 5 to 7 hours. It was like a lot of time. And so I just want to listen to kind of 2 minutes of his opening statement here, especially to look at the language that he's using around why make this right now. So let's check. And was it okay to hear? Were you kind of able to hear? Okay, good.
Thank you, Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As we sit here, there are more than 1 billion people around the world who don't have access to a bank account, but could through mobile phones if the right system existed. That includes more than 14 million people right here in the US. Being shut out of the financial system has real consequences for people's lives, and it's often the most disadvantaged people who pay the highest price. People pay far too high a cost and have to wait far too long to send money home to their families abroad. The current system is failing them. The financial industry is stagnant, and there is no digital financial architecture to support the innovation that we need. I believe that this problem can be solved, and Libra can help. The idea behind Libra is that sending money should be as easy and secure as sending a message. Libra will be a global payment system, fully backed by a reserve of cash and highly liquid assets. Now, I believe that this is something that needs to get built, but I get that I'm not the ideal messenger for this right now. We faced a lot of issues over the past few years, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who wish it were anyone but Facebook who were helping to propose this. But there's a reason that we care about this, and that's because Facebook is about putting power in people's hands. Our services already give people a voice to express what matters to them and to build businesses that create opportunity. Giving people control of their money is important too, and a simple, secure, and stable way to transfer money is empowering. Over the long term, this means that more people transact on our platforms. That'll be good for our business. But even if it doesn't, I still think this could help people everywhere. Before we move forward, there are important risks that need to be addressed. There are questions about financial stability, fighting terrorism, and more, and I'm here today to discuss those risks and how we plan to address them. But I also hope that we get a chance to talk about the risks of not innovating. Because while we debate these issues, the rest of the world isn't waiting. China is moving quickly to launch a similar idea in the coming months. Libra is going to be backed mostly by dollars, and I believe that it will extend America's financial leadership around the world, as well as our democratic values and oversight. But if America doesn't innovate, our financial leadership is not guaranteed.
So, yeah, do people have any initial thoughts on his opening statement there? Yeah, Lucas.
I think it's interesting that he tries to like connect Libra having all this power to the U.S. having all this power. And granted, most of the currencies in the Libra basket of reserve currencies, it's mostly denominated in U.S. dollar. But I mean, it's still, I feel like Facebook is the controlling authority there, and it's sort of wrong to sort of equate that means that the U.S. will be able to sort of stave off Chinese influence by allowing Facebook to have all of this power. I feel like that's a bit disingenuous.
Yeah, and I think, and obviously he knows his audience, which is a bunch of Congress people,
Yeah.
and so it's like, hey, and so he's both hitting their fears of, hey, there's going to be this arms race, and like, if we don't do it, China's going to do it, and kind of pitting Democrats and Republicans against each other there, probably to some extent, of like, oh, regulation versus like innovation, and then saying, and making these claims which might be true, which are like, oh, it could, if you know, it is, in theory, it's 50% of the basket is US dollars. So it's like, maybe it does actually help us extend our financial hegemony or whatever, but yeah, he definitely is speaking to an audience there for sure. Are there other thoughts? Or
One thing that's buzzing my head is giving people control. Like, the moment I heard it, I was like, is that what governments do want? How much do they want? And if Facebook is doing that, not just in terms of money, but even in terms of speech, is that acceptable? So yeah, I'm just buzzing on this.
Yeah, great question. I think in general, Facebook, in a lot of this hearing, I watched a lot of it, and a lot of it was Congress people pushing back against Facebook for their for them being the deciders over stuff like free speech and whatever. And so yeah, that's I think in general misaligned. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, I thought the raising the specter of somehow losing an arms race to China, I thought was very he was very eager to push that right out front, right? And that's, I think, quite. I mean, yeah, in some ways, I think very, very disingenuous in that governments are even less likely to trust a Chinese banking system. Although that said, that certain governments where China already owns a great deal of the debt and has already created a great deal of control probably would have little recourse to that. So I mean, I think in some ways it's a legitimate concern, but it's probably I'm not sure Facebook's gonna solve that problem, right? Yeah, that's more of a government influence problem.
Yeah.
I think the fact that Libra has already been sort of like the baby that they've put out there, they're sort of tied to that. But I do think there's like a bigger underlying message of like there are huge risks of like us not innovating, and like maybe the conversation should be more on like, oh, like does the US create like its own CBDC, or does the private sector, not just Facebook, help build new infrastructure so that the US can offer more than just like what it has today with SWIFT, that we have like a conglomerate like that supports the SWIFT system, which kind of carries our global payment system today. But the thing is that in a testimony like this, I feel like he can't stray too far from just the Libra story, because going beyond that just opens up a whole other can of worms, which should be both sectors coming and sitting down at a table and being like, okay, like what are the other options? And the person who created Libra is obviously not going to start that conversation for a Libra in a Libra testimony. So I just think there are a lot of other things. But Elliot Schrage, I don't know how to say his last name, but he basically works on the public policy, did public policy at Facebook for like 10 or 11 years, and now is helping with Libra at Facebook. And he came and spoke in one of our classes, and he was like, look, like at the end of the day, we have like like compared to other startups who are trying to do similar things, he was like, we have the reach, and he was like, I foresee that Libra isn't going to look like what it looks like today. He's like, because we're already kind of like raising questions, and like people are like more alert to the problem now than they've ever been before, that we will essentially evolve Libra to be what regulatory people want. He's like, yes, we didn't expect it to, this wasn't how it was supposed to launch, but he was like, we did sort of kind of intend to like bring people in, and knew that it wasn't going to launch just as is. We knew that it's going to change. I don't know if that was his like,
That's
like
kind of their PR spiel.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
also a true thing, which is that people talk about this as a regulatory launch, where it's just like, hey, we're launching this such that then David Marcus, one of the head people at Libra, and Mark Zuckerberg and everybody can go and speak at all these things, and to get the conversation going around like, what could this thing look like? And I also agree with you, Natalia, as you're saying. Obviously, Mark Zuckerberg's not going to say like, "Hey, we need to innovate generally. I don't care if it's Libra or if it's a U.S. Federal Reserve kind of CBDC. Just as long as we innovate." That's obviously not his MO here. I think that the other final note that I might say is that he definitely, some of the concerns, he says obviously there are concerns, and he notes two of monitoring illicit transactions and then macro systemic risk. And those are, when we think about our three big buckets of tech ethics, financial ethics, and institutional ethics, and under that financial ethics bucket and financial regulation, there's three things there. Two of them are those two: monitoring illicit transactions and systemic risk, with the final one being like the securities law, investor protection stuff. So he highlights that as well. I think that, let me see. Yeah, there's one final note that I just want to say with this is that the banked, the unbanked narrative, I think this was in some of the readings about like how it's just, these narratives are tough, but I think that the math that I know is there's about 1.7 billion people total that are unbanked. About 1 billion of them could have smartphones or a mobile phone of some variety. But then the issue is that 2/3 of the people who are unbanked, who don't have bank accounts, say, hey, I don't have a bank account because I just don't have enough money. And so it's like, that's a criticism that has been brought up with Libra. And actually, if you watch this whole testimony, he essentially just talks about the unbanked thing at the very beginning, and then during the remaining 7 hours, it's not really brought up. They pivot away from it really hard and then pivot hard into the us versus China, innovation versus regulation piece. So people are creating Libra in order to, Facebook and others are experimenting with integrating payments into their systems. These are interesting because of first kind of like private money that's maybe that's trying to be created in many, many years away from nation state money, kind of corporate cryptocurrencies. And then now, and the narrative that pushes it is this bank the unbanked narrative, which is true and not true in a variety of ways.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so two thoughts. The first was, I think Libra is like the biggest mandate out of all the other tech companies, but I know like Amazon's been talking to banks about opening up bank accounts. I know Google is launching Cache next year, which is basically they're going to give people bank accounts and use like Google payment system. And so I feel like all of tech is sort of like encroaching on this. And so like, how do we think about what the other tech companies are doing, even though their mandate isn't as like flashy and as big? Like, are they just doing the same steps to get there? So that's just one interesting thing. And then my other question to you was going to be, do you think Libra is a cryptocurrency, and do you think Libra actually runs on a blockchain? Because there's a lot of people I've talked to where they're like, okay, like Libra itself is okay mandate, but like if we even tie it back to the tech, it doesn't actually count as a blockchain, or it doesn't actually count as a cryptocurrency because of XYZ reasons. I'm curious like what your technical thoughts are on like if it even matches the technology.
Would you count it as a cryptocurrency, Neha?
It seems like it has a cryptographic interface. I guess it depends on how you define cryptocurrency. Is it by the monetary policy, or who has control over it, or is it that you need a private key to sign transactions, use digital signatures? I think it depends on how you define it. I guess. I'm curious as to the reasons that the people you talked to felt like it wasn't a cryptocurrency.
Because they felt like Libra wasn't actually on a blockchain. They didn't feel like it was a decentralized ledger. They felt like it was
because there's 100, or at the moment 21.
Right, and like they would have to transfer to permissionless, and there was another fact about it, but it was mostly a bunch of the arguments were based mostly on the fact that the blockchain didn't check off, and so cryptocurrency didn't check off. Like, I also kind of agree with you. I think that there's like a cryptographic, or there's like public-private keys, like that's what makes it to me. But we also don't hear about cryptocurrency without having some sort of like blockchain mechanism.
So I think that there's sort of the way I put it is there's like a spectrum of decentralization, right? And it exists on multiple levels. It's not just the technology. Sometimes there's been some posts about this, and recent I can link you guys to them. There have been some posts to try to measure how decentralized is this system. We didn't talk about this during the class.
We talked about decentralization to some extent with in the income equality. Time you weren't here with Gini coefficients.
So okay, good. So the Gini coefficient stuff. I just wanted to make sure I didn't repeat. And people have used different metrics. Is it how many nodes are there running your blockchain? Mm-hmm. Is it how many nodes are there that can validate transactions, that are actually up and running and validating transactions? Is it, is there a foundation behind the cryptocurrency? Is there a fearless leader who is still alive and well and influencing how it works? And so the way that I usually describe it is there's a technical element to decentralization, there's an economic element, and there's a social element, and then maybe legal as well, right? So you have to think about it on all these different axes. Who has control? And control could be in any one of these buckets. It's not just literally how many of the validators do you have to compromise before you can change what the currency is doing. Because if you think about reality, these are large companies. Most of them, I think, if not all of them, do business in the United States and consider the U.S. an important part of their income and want to continue to do business in the United States. So to me, that would mean that Libra is pretty much under the jurisdiction of the U.S. If the U.S. says you can't do this, if the U.S. says reverse that transaction, the validators are going to reverse the transaction, right? Also, Libra is fully backed, so somebody has to actually hold that money. We can't hold money in a totally decentralized way yet. It actually has to be somewhere in a bank. Someone's got to have the bonds somewhere, right? And what Libra is not really what the validators say. So the validators are constructing the blockchain which says who owns what Libra, but who's controlling who gets to withdraw and exchange their Libra from the central pool of reserves? I would argue that's really the important link for who owns what value. So the blockchain might say you own Libra, but then you go to the Libra Association and ask to withdraw your Libra, and they say, oh no, the Swiss government says that you were collaborating with North Korea, and so I'm sorry, we can't give you your money back, or whatever. So what does it really matter that the blockchain says that you have it? So there are all these different axes and all these different ways to think about control that all come into play, and unfortunately all sort of, you kind of need all of them to work. Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting was that I did not watch the entire 7 hours, but I did read through a bunch of the transcript, and a lot of the questions were really conflating Facebook and Libra, the Libra Association, assuming that they were really the same thing, and Zuckerberg made great pains to try to explain that they weren't. But I think there was a lot of skepticism around that, and I think one of the interesting questions is, it comes back to governance. Like how do we know, for example, Libra Association will continue to keep the one-for-one backing between Libra and the currency behind it, and we don't. I can't reveal why or where, but I've read some internal investment documents for some of the people who are considering entering the Libra Association, and some of them very clearly stated that they believe someday that it would float, that they would actually drop the backing like the gold reserve and make tons more money. I mean, just like that was actually
in the documents.
That was an internal analysis by some
So
some kid.
The Libra Association didn't say
No.
Okay, that's what I was trying to...
This is some
Okay.
Some Harvard kid.
We're just saying it would be possible for this to happen.
They predicted that it would happen,
Okay,
or that there was
But this person didn't have any privileged position
Oh no.
inside of the. Okay.
It was just kind of fascinating though. But it's possible if that were relied on, that notion were relied on, that certain members of the Libra Association are thinking, well, maybe someday the association 11 of the 20 members will get together and vote to let it float, which I think technically they could do, right? There's nothing, back to like, is it a cryptocurrency or not? There's nothing in the inherent structure of the code that prevents that from happening. It comes down to like 20 companies right now, or 100 companies someday, deciding what to do, right? So I think that's kind of an interesting question. And of course, Congress was looking at Zuckerberg and thinking it's all up to you, which maybe it is.
Yeah, I think for everybody it'd be helpful to kind of loop both of these things together, just giving a quick technical overview of Libra to make sure we're all on the same page here about. And in general, I think this is a good thing if you're ever trying to do an ethical analysis of if you're trying to apply EthicalOS to something, you got to understand what the thing is first, and so it gets into all these kind of conversations. In other words, you have to understand the technical affordances of the technology in order to actually look into it. So I think just drawing some things on the board for a second here, there's, as everybody's talking about, there is Libra, which is the both you can think of it as the protocol kind of, and also the Libra Foundation, which has all of those. It was 28 people.
I think it's called the association.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I 100% agree. The Libra Association, and it had 28 people. Now it has 21 people, with Facebook and a variety of others, other both big multinational corporations, and also some nonprofit groups.
They haven't collected the money yet, by the way.
They have not collected the money yet. Yeah, you need to pay $10 million
to be in the association.
To be in the association, and the reason, we'll talk about why, so there's 21 members, and this association is, this is different, by the way, than Libra, which is the actual, it's just the wallet software that Facebook themselves are kind of developing, and so you can imagine this kind of I kind of think it's similar-ish, like Bitcoin Core has a wallet software. It's you can choose, you can either go through, you can choose a variety of different wallet options, and Facebook will be developing one of them, this Libra wallet. But that's different than the development of the underlying blockchain and the governance of the underlying blockchain through the Libra Association. The reason why, so there are two kind of main types of coins here. There's the Libra itself, which is this three squiggles thing. And then there's also LIT, the Libra investment token. And so the Libra itself is the thing that, the way it works is you put in these bonds, essentially, or like essentially you put in money into a bucket. And then when you put like $1 into the bucket, you get some amount of Libra back out. And this bucket has, I have like the numbers here, but it's like 50% US dollars, 18% euros, 14% Japanese yen, etc. So there's essentially money, both US dollars and other things, go into this bucket, and then you get your kind of Libra, you get the Libra out. And this is what you all were talking about just seconds ago when you say fractional reserve banking, where the current system with like big US commercial banks is for every $10 that you take in, for every $1 that you give to them, they can lend out $10. So you only have to have 10% of the amount of money that you've gotten. You can essentially just create 10x that amount to like lend to other things. With this, it's a 1-to-1. It's 100% reserve in theory, where the money you put in is equal to the money that you put out. And then this Libra investment token is what these members are, why they would pay, in theory, this $10 million to get this Libra investment token. And the Libra investment token, you can imagine there's this big pool of money here, and this pool of money, so it's a lot of money. This pool of money, if you hang that out somewhere in the world, it will make money. Money makes money. And so, who gets the interest on that money? It's the Libra investment token holders, the LIT holders. So it's the same way that Venmo works or PayPal works. That's how those companies in general make money. Is like if you have like $100 in Venmo, it's not like that $100. That $100 is in a big pot with everybody else's money at the Venmo offices, and they are investing it in things and making money off of it. And so this is very similar to that, but instead that money return goes back to the LIT holders. Does that make sense?
Just like a side note then on like the Venmo thing.
Mhm.
So if you hold your money there, they're investing that and just make sure they have enough reserves to pay you if you want to cash out. But if you're someone that like immediately cashes out and never holds money in Venmo, like are you not their ideal customer then?
Yes. You're not their ideal customer, and someone like PayPal, and I don't know their exact numbers these days, but they used to say, hey, this money will get to you in 2 business days. Well, what are they doing in those 2 business days? They're investing it. And so it's like so in general, yes, you are not the ideal customer for Venmo or PayPal if you don't leave your money in their system, because they make money by getting interest off of the bucket of money that they have.
But you're still important because it's the network effect.
Yeah.
Because somebody who's paying you might be leaving money.
Mm-hmm.
Or the person you're paying might be leaving that money in their account.
I wonder why they have transaction like thresholds then. Like wouldn't they want people to transact as much money as possible on the like I think like
There are still fees.
Legal.
oh
I was gonna say there's like regulatory things too for.
besides the fees, like I don't think like I can do more than X thousands of dollars on Venmo per week, for example.
So I think part of that has to do with fraud detection. So with all these payment services, Stripe, Venmo, PayPal, massive number one problem is fraud. It's people, putting out fake businesses and getting paid, and so they really do that to throttle the amount of potential harm from the fraud, because they have to, oftentimes they might have to, eat it or do something about it.
AML also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that.
I'm a little confused on how the investment goes along with the 100% backing, right? Like if they need to have 100% reserves backed, but at the same time those reserves are being invested at any given time, how do these two things work together?
Yeah, so I think if I understand your question correctly, which is like, hey, if you put in money, US dollars and other things into the bucket, and then you get Libra out in the world, eventually people want to take their Libra out in the world and get real money back. And your question is, how do they invest this bucket of real money if at any point in time anybody could take the other money out. Is that
Yeah,
what's your
because
question?
it seems like a important goal to them is have this 100% backing, and like one part of the documentation in Libra said that was important to them, and that at any point they wanted to make sure there was no sort of bank run. They wouldn't want, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, well, and so I don't know too much about this, but in general, and this is why like we have the rule of you only need 10%, like we have 10% fractional reserve banking in the U.S., where it's like that's the amount of money where it's like, hey, we don't expect so many people to want to pull out their money at once that we won't have this run on the bank or whatever. So I think that their goal is essentially where they say, hey, and I don't know how they would actually implement this if there was something like a run on the bank, but they feel confident in that there's going to be all this Libra out in the world that's being transacted, doing all these things, and then eventually people will want to switch it back into normal money, US fiat or fiat, but they are comfortable. I don't know, internally they'll probably have their own rules and regulations around like how much of that money can they invest at a given point in time versus
Yes.
yes.
So they said it's all back, but they didn't say it would be liquid. So they didn't say that they could redeem 100% of the Libra back for cash at any given moment. But they're saying that there actually is, though there really is. Let's just assume it's $1. You know, let's say it was done $1, not forgetting about the basket. They're really saying that for every Libra out there is $1 that got paid in, right? Which is different than Bitcoin, which has nothing, right? Like there is no reserve at all. We only assign value to Bitcoin because other people feel it's valuable, right? So I think the quick answer to your question is, like we said, you would probably take the pie and you'd say, all right, I'm going to keep 10% on hand, liquid at any moment, just so that no matter what I could pay, because I don't think more than 10% will ever ask me for that at once. I'll take another 50% and put it in treasury bonds and euro bonds and stuff that really it's safe. It returns 1%, but it's redeemable at almost any moment, right? And then other stuff might go into a little more risky things, but like I doubt. I would assume they would never put it in the stock market, for example, like because they want it almost be countercyclical and things like that. But that's all undefined. Like they made no statements whatsoever as to how they would actually invest their money.
Where is that 10 million going?
Where does the 10 million go? So the 10 million, you can think of it as, if this is one part of it, which is the dollars, like US dollars and or other basket of stuff in here and then Libra out, the $10 million goes for this lit, where it's like the $10 million goes in and lit comes out, this Libra investment token. And I don't know where that $10 million.
It's the first
It's the initial
6 inches of the pool.
Great,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah, it's just the initial reserve.
So we cannot buy it.
No.
We cannot buy it.
$10
No,
million.
only, if you become an accredited investor and have $10 million
And you have to be invited. Not just anyone can do it.
They have hundreds of applications to be part of this, and they chose this initial crew of 28, 21, whatever. And so so that's and let me say, I guess a quiz for everybody. This lit versus Libra. So last time we chatted about things as securities or not securities, or having so pause for a second, don't answer yet. So the first question for everybody is Libra. So this is a coin that is it is designed to be a stable coin, and again, so I want everybody in a little bit to either put up a 1, which is like this thing is definitely not a security, to a 5, which is this thing definitely is a security, or something in between 2, 3, or 4. Do you think that Libra, the actual the stable coin, is a security or not? So I'll give you a couple seconds to think, and then in 3, 2, 1, we're gonna put up our hands. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. We got some. Everybody's a little scared, but the key, it's a 1. It's because it's designed. A key part of that Howey test is expectation of profit. And if you are doing something where you expect to be stable, you're not expecting any profit. What about the Libra investment token? Do we think that
correlated with which one?
Say it again?
Number 1 correlated with.
Number 1 is not a security at all, because it does not pass the Howey test, because it does not. you don't invest money in a stable token in order to make money, because that's it. For Libra investment token, a thing that you put in money, and then that thing, you expect to get returns on that money, on your Libra investment token as a result of people investing your money in different places, and then it comes back to you. So is that a security or not a security? 1 is not a security, 5 is a security. Ready, in 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah, generally correct. Which is, yeah, so it's pretty much a 5, where it is, you are putting money into a thing, you're hoping to hell that the Libra Association does good stuff with it and like invests it correctly and whatever, and then you expect to get profit as a result.
And what's it invested in? Like, is it like American securities? Is it other cryptocurrencies? And like, who decides that?
As Joe was saying, they haven't really defined what they invested in. They're really trying to make it seem super stable, and so they are saying in general that it's going to be invested in short-term government bonds. So one versus so yes, Libra Lit is pretty much a security, though you could imagine it could become with this weird mutability thing if in the future there are every human is part of the Libra Association and it's super decentralized and blah blah blah. Maybe it's not a security at that point in time, but definitely a security right now. The other note is one found on like this Libra Wallet piece is it's made by Facebook, and they a question with all these things with any kind of wallet. The biggest question with any wallet or exchange is like, do you do KYC and AML? And so they have said, yes, we are going to do KYC AML. We are going to make sure that you have to have a government ID. If you go to like calibra.com, it says, hey, how can I sign up? It says you either have a Facebook account or no, even if you do have a Facebook account, you need your government ID. And so they need to know who you are getting into the system. But they don't make, at the protocol level, there are no rules around needing KYC to create a wallet, but the main wallet, Facebook and Libra, is KYC.
So you need to have a Facebook account?
I believe no is the answer. No, just a government ID.
Are the APIs open for Libra? Can you create your own wallet?
So I would say in general, and this is a note, like all this stuff is really being updated. Even just a couple days ago, on November 9th, there was a V3, version 3 of the Libra Whitepaper. And so I would say in general, at the beginning, there's technically code that you could run that really didn't do anything. Over time, they're doing more and more in this world for how it actually, so to answer your question, what was your
Can you create your own wallet?
Can you create your own wallet? I think that there's at least Calibra is coding up their own wallet. And I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were if Facebook was trying to incentivize or work with other people to start making their wallets as well, to code up their own version of a wallet. But I'm not sure.
And would that wallet have to, can you like make money into existence off of just your government ID, or would you have to connect to like a bank account? I think that was like another thing that we talked about at the very beginning of the class is like, okay, it's banking the unbanked, but like most people don't have bank accounts, like how do they enter the system originally?
Yeah, so I don't know how, I don't think it's, in theory, what you should be able to do is to take some amount of money. Either you can imagine just having your Libra wallet and then people sending you Libra. And so in that situation, you wouldn't need a bank account. Right? You would just, eventually you would need to say, okay, then when you have a bunch of Libra and you want to get it out and you want to turn it into US dollars, even though you live in some, like Uganda or whatever, there's at that point in time, how would you so I don't know, I think it probably makes it a lot easier from a user experience perspective to have a bank account, kind of like with something like Bitcoin, but there are these things like localbitcoins.com or whatever where you can just meet, like you can imagine getting a bunch of Libra from folks, or setting up a wallet with your government issued ID, no Facebook account, no bank account, getting a bunch of Libra from people, they're sending it to you for your goods and services, and then eventually you take that Libra and you go to your local friend or whatever and you say, just person face to face, hey, I'm gonna transfer a bunch of Libra to you and you're gonna give me a bunch of Ugandan shillings or whatever.
I also think that part of the reason they got the partners they did was to do local merchant-based transfer from cash to Libra potentially.
So in that case, for the end user, applications like this already exist almost everywhere. Like here we have Venmo, in India we have ATM, we have M-Pesa in Africa. So then what's for user? There's nothing new in this for the unbanked.
Yeah, that's a very reasonable argument. And I think that Libra's pushback would be that there are a bunch of people with Facebook accounts or WhatsApp accounts or Messenger accounts that we would be able to bank through this. I think that that would be their main claim, and maybe a sub-claim of theirs might be that I don't know how tightly coupled M-Pesa is to the traditional financial system, but you can imagine that you could claim that this is less tightly coupled.
But even that claim is, if you are doing KYC, then you just become another bank. So people are unbanked because they don't have documents, they don't have IDs. So.
And I think that's what and again that's an argument of, but I think that the first claim is a very reasonable one, which is there are probably at least 100 million people around the world that don't have. There are at least 1 billion people around the world that don't have bank accounts, that do have smartphones or mobile phones, and probably at least 100 million of those have Facebook accounts but aren't banked. And so if you imagine making this, then quote unquote immediately, now your WhatsApp and your Facebook account and your Messenger account do have banking built in or whatever. So that's the argument.
If you have KYC documents.
Yeah. So how will the KYC?
So I'm looking at exactly this is my final project. So I think the question, that how is it better than M-Pesa? The mobile payment systems generally require bank accounts. So those are bank backed, like Alipay. I believe Paytm.
They just ask you a phone number. So as long as you can receive an SMS, they verify you by SMS.
And Paysa is like that, but my understanding is Paytm and Alipay, WeChat Pay actually all require a link to a bank account, like Venmo here. Is that
only if you want to keep money.
If you want to keep money, you can receive money. Yes, you could. Yes, exactly. But in terms of financial inclusion, if you're actually trying to bank somebody and give them access to financial instruments, then it's no good if you can't store money, right? But I think the part of the question, that 2/3 statistic who say they don't have enough money to put into a bank account, that's kind of open to some interpretation as to what that really means, because that comes from a World Bank study, and they asked people who are unbanked, give us of these 5 reasons, name as many as you like, so you can name more than one as to why you don't have a bank account. That's the most frequently cited one, and it's also the biggest percentage of people who only answer one answer. That's the biggest answer, but it's still only I think 10%.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So part of the interpretation seems to be more that they're saying it's just not worth it to me. I literally may have no money, so there's no point. But the threshold isn't high enough, and I think there's some expectation that if it were easier to use one of these payment systems or have an account, that more people would. And I think that's part of what we've seen in India and China, where the rise of these payment apps is so quick that people are like, oh well, this is the first time there's some practical value to me of having some kind of an account, even if it's not an actual savings account.
So all the people with phone already have those apps in India and China.
Yes, I think that's true, that the growth of those are already happening quite a bit. I think probably the question is kind of like, what is the standard of the KYC requirements going to really be, right? Will U.S. regulators really demand a full government ID KYC kind of thing for someone who's going to transact less than $100 in a year or something? And I think probably the stock answer is yeah, they will. So in which case you're right, it makes no difference whatsoever. But perhaps that those things might get negotiated over time. And I think Facebook probably assumes that they can do KYC faster, cheaper, and more convenient than just about anybody else over time, and may lower that threshold somewhat. So I think that's kind of the marginal bet in terms of penetrating those markets. But I think it's pretty clear that Facebook probably doesn't really give a damn about financial inclusion. This is not about financial inclusion.
Well, it's about making money off of me.
But even that, even if they could reach another 100 million people who are unbanked, like the amount of money that would actually mean in the Libra system, getting paid back to the holders of those Facebook security tokens, is probably not significant, right? You know, most financial institutions lose like a lot of money by reaching deeper and deeper into because the balances just aren't there, right? You know,
Banking rich people is profitable. Banking poor people is less profitable. Yeah.
If you look at the lowest quartile, the deposits held by like so say the lowest decile in any bank compared to the deposits held compared to the median deposits, it's almost it's zero. It's like people hold like $200 in their account, $50, right? Versus.
But you multiply
thousands.
that by 1 million people, that starts to become. But so it
That's-
really depends on
Yeah,
what the
there's like
costs
5
are.
million people, $5 million. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's
but
it's hard to get to
depends
big
on what the
numbers.
costs are per person, right?
Yeah.
And if Facebook can really get those costs,
Yeah.
they might be able to get the cost down so low that it actually does become
Yeah.
profitable to
I think
bank those people, right?
I think it opens, but probably not to the unbanked. I think to the people who are less banked or less frequent users of financial services. Yes, it could probably make a difference, but if you're literally talking about all the people who still don't have a Paytm account or still don't have an M-Pesa account, right? It's already there's a lot of adverse selection going on there. You're going after a poorer and poorer, less and less accessible group. Not that it's not worth doing. I think from a humanitarian perspective, it's very worth doing. But from a profit perspective, I think that's really a hard argument.
Yeah, let's do one final vote and then we should start to move on. But yeah.
I'm sorry, it was
You're
gonna be
good.
another comment that was gonna extend this. So.
That's okay. No, that's why I said one more, but no more. So that's perfect. You get to. Yeah.
Okay, well then one of my friends is like he has a company that's in this space, so I thought I might just add that he said that so he's working on banking the underbanked in the United States, and he said a lot of it's the reason it's not profitable for a lot of people is that so much money goes into customer acquisition, and it's possible that M-Pesa is trying to reach these other potential customers, but it's hard. And Facebook is in this place where they have already reached these potential customers, or at least they're partway there.
Yeah. No, it's a very good point, and I think I would expect that threshold, the floor of like where it's really not economical to bank certain people will drop, and maybe pretty significant. So and if it's another 50 million people, that's meaningful. But I still think Facebook's attention will not be focused on that sector. I think it's going to be focused on everything else. Because it's a business enterprise.
But what if it's a negligible cost to reach them? Like what I'm saying is like customer acquisition. If that's like too low compared to the amount they're gonna reap off their deposits, then it's hard to make a profit.
Yeah.
But if Facebook already has customer acquisition, then
no, definitely, I couldn't agree more.
And that's kind of just this macro thing of these huge internet aggregators that have zero marginal costs for a lot of things.
Right.
This is kind of looping in now finance into that zero marginal cost mindset.
Yeah.
And if you can really make quick, easy KYC or whatever, so that the cost becomes really, really low to get access a new person, then even if they don't have much money, maybe the math adds up such that you do start to make money from them. I do want to say one other note from a technical perspective around how this system just works in this question about like, was it a cryptocurrency, is it a blockchain or whatever. So it is, they use, Libra's using this, so if you think about the kinds of blockchains that exist, really you can think about like two big categories. There's like the proof of work blockchains with Nakamoto consensus that do a bunch of mining to determine, and they're fully permissionless. It's like anybody can produce the next block as long as you do a bunch of mining to do it correctly. Or there are these other systems like these, what I would call, you could call them proof of stake systems, POS, or you could also call these ones there's this world, and Neha will be able to know a lot more about this, and I'll ask her to clarify this in a second, but this world of a bunch of these new BFT algorithms, these Byzantine fault tolerance algorithms, and the idea there is that you just have, so these are permissioned, and the idea is that these 21 members will also run these validator nodes, and the way it'll work is essentially a round-robin style system where you say, hey, whose turn, there's a bunch of transactions that people have been sending to the network, they're all in the mempool, they're all here, okay, I'm gonna make a new block, and then determining whose turn it is to make a new block, it's not like, oh, whoever did whoever solved the Bitcoin puzzle gets to create a new block. Instead, it's like, whose turn is it? Oh shit, it's my turn. And then I do all stuff, and then I present the block to the network, and the network says, good job. And then it says, but I don't get anything for it. And then it just keeps on going around, and it says, now it's your turn, now it's your turn. So that's in general how these systems work, so that you have a permission validator set, is what they call them. And in this world, the validators are these people, these association members who are running these nodes. And I guess just a note on that is that there's a lot of, just like I think we've chatted a little bit about this, innovations that have been happening in zero knowledge recently, mostly as a result of the cryptocurrency world, where it's like, you got Snarks, you got Stars, you got Sharks, you got Sonic, you got Aurora, you got a whole bunch of stuff that people, it's really crazy. Similar stuff seems to be happening in the world of Byzantine fault tolerance and how much exploration people are doing, where there was this old school version that came out in 2001, and now you have this other one, Tendermint, and this thing, SBFT, and then you have this thing called Hot Stuff, and Hot Stuff just came out a year ago, the paper, but Libra uses a variant on Hot Stuff, and then Cello, which is another project, uses this thing called BF which is a variant on Hot Stuff. There's Aleph, there's a lot of people that are just, and really all they are just different ways to think about these either permissioned validator sets, or some of them, is a permissionless validator set where you have to, the percentage chance that you get chosen to be the next block producer is how much money you have staked. And so there's a lot of stuff happening here, but and Libra is part of this crew of researcher types who are starting to innovate in this BFT space. Hey, how would you add anything to that, or what are the innovations that are what's the difference between all these things?
Sure. So PBFT, which was developed here in 1999, I think, was sort of the first practical version of a protocol that solved this problem, which was first formulated in 1979, 1980. And the motivation for it was actually literally some distributed computing researchers were talking to folks at NASA. And NASA had computers on board their rockets that they were going to send into space. And obviously, once it's up there, you can't really fix it. And so they decided to, in order to sort of, and they're obviously very expensive to put up, so you want to have some kind of fallback mechanism in case some piece of equipment fails. So in case one computer might become faulty, it's hit by a solar ray, or who knows what could happen, it just breaks. Their idea was that they would have multiple computers, and the faultiness might not just be turning off, it might literally be incorrect operation because it's hit by a solar flare or something like that. So the idea was you'd have multiple computers that were all trying to do the same thing, and they needed to agree on the output. And that way, if one of the computers was bad, that was okay. The others could sort of pick up the slack. And you didn't even need to know which one was bad. You just needed to know that it wasn't more than one, for example. So initially, they were thinking about, so this was called sort of Byzantine agreement. And it was named as such because the person who came up with it, Leslie Lamport, really liked giving things like names, old-timey names and things like that. So he formulated this thing called the Byzantine generals problem to describe what it was, and all sorts of things like that. So anyway, but at this point in time, they were talking 4 computers. Okay, they really, they just thought there'd be 4. Now we're running blockchain networks where there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of users who we want to participate in this consensus, and we want to be able to tolerate as many of them as possible going bad. So this has required a lot of really new ideas in this space, and that's why there's so many of these. I think it's because we're really living in a renaissance of research in this area right now. So the advent of cryptocurrencies has provided a new use case for these algorithms and new requirements. So people are innovating on them, and they're coming up with all sorts of different things, and people are trying them and trying to figure out which ones work best, because you can't really figure out which ones work best till you actually implement them and use them.
And I guess one, so yeah, this is, and that's when they say like large scale consensus, that's what they're talking about, the difference between 4 computers versus like tens of thousands. And I guess Neha, just like as a question, do you know when people like how are the different like competing or academic research, like how are they, like how is something like Libra BF, do you know how these things are like competing against each other, the different kinds of research questions that they're trying to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it just from the research angle, they're competing in the way that all researchers compete, which is you come up with ideas, you publish them, people read them, they come up with their own ideas, and you sort of go back and forth and keep getting better and better and better. So, you know, I wouldn't say there's a special type of competition there, but maybe you're talking about their implementation.
Their implementation, like like is it transactions per second that they're optimizing
okay.
for?
You're asking more like what is the difference between these?
Yeah,
Like, what's the difference in the guarantees and the goals? And things like
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
So I think as we've moved forward, one thing that everybody's trying to get to is more transactions per second. Another thing is tolerating crazier and weirder types of adversaries. So being able to tolerate, you know, a higher number of adversaries in your network, or being able to tolerate an adversary who has more power in your network. And then other things that they're optimizing on are lower number of messages, and you know, a big thing now since the advent of Bitcoin is, hey, maybe we don't need everybody to talk to each other to reach agreement. So it used to be with these protocols that everybody talked to each other multiple times to reach agreement. Now with Bitcoin, we saw a network where everybody didn't talk. A lot of people just listened, actually, and only a small number of people talked, but it was still secure, and that was kind of interesting. So they're developing protocols like this where not everybody has to talk. So, yeah.
So do these not all reach the like 1/3 Byzantine adversary ideal guarantees? You said they were looking at weaker adversary models and
So there's the yes.
a smaller fraction.
So I think all of these can tolerate up to 1/3 of the participants being Byzantine.
Okay.
So in terms of the number,
Mhm.
they are at the sort of ideal number. However, I think that they probably tolerate different types of adversaries. So there's sort of like, you know, weak adversaries, adaptive adversaries, static. There's all these sort of like little tweaks you can put on your adversary, what they're allowed to do, how much control of the network they have, and I think it's might be different for many of them. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so I think that just to say, when we think about, thank you Neha for, I think that this is, so in Libra's goal is they're initially just gonna have this permission validator set, and as we were saying earlier, it's like probably the case that like they have this algorithm that will, at the beginning, if like you have 21 validators or 100, it's like, and they're all people like Lyft or Facebook or whatever, it's like they're going to do what they're supposed to do, but then longer term their goal is to become a permissionless validator set, and to move over to something like proof of stake or whatever. And people are skeptical that or at the timelines of what would happen or whatever, but right now that's how their system works, is by individuals that are part of the network producing these blocks.
Is that easy to usually make that transition? Like, are there other examples of projects that have done?
No one's really made a transition like that. Ethereum is trying to make a transition proof of work to proof of stake. That's been like 5 years in the making. And that would be different also than a BFT to a something like a Libra BFT to a permissionless proof of stake network. Again, doing these transitions is very complicated. So it hasn't really been done as far as I know.
I was going to ask Nia if you think that there is some real progress going on here. I mean, do you think that?
Oh yes, definitely. Yes.
And in terms of transactions per second, or where is the progress?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think that we can divide it into sort of research progress and real world progress that we actually get to take advantage of and do things with. So I think in terms of the research, we've seen huge strides and really cool new algorithms, and it's very interesting. In terms of the real world, there are some limits on things like the speed of light, which limit how fast you can actually just send messages around. There's physical limits to that. And also, I've been a little bit worried because I see a lot of people launching new coins with new consensus algorithms as their main differentiating feature. And I don't think that's a user-facing differentiating feature. That's not a good reason to launch a new coin. So I think also performance of these things is really very tricky and very dependent on workloads. So you might have a new algorithm that performs better under certain workloads but not under others. So you really have to do a lot of practical experimentation and testing and things like that to see what's going to work out.
But it might be expensive or difficult to carry out. So
exactly, but I will say that there definitely have been points in time where improvements in research in terms of distributed systems has led to dramatically new features for people. Like for example with Google, Google wouldn't be able to index the entire web if they hadn't done a lot of innovating in terms of how to store the entire web, how to access the entire web, how to index it, how to retrieve it quickly for you. All of those were sort of distributed systems ideas. They weren't exactly consensus. There is consensus at Google, but those ideas lead to really cool applications like being able to search the entire web in less than a second.
Cool.
One more question, then I think we'll take a break. But yeah.
Okay, follow-up question on that. Also in the Libra documentation, it seemed like they were trying to reach about 1,000 transactions per second. And is that a limitation due to these consensus algorithms? And do you think that there will actually be a way beyond that limitation? Because you could imagine there being some a set of conference tickets or event tickets that go on sale at a given time, and you need way more than 1,000 transactions per second to be.
Yeah, I do. I think we're going to innovate, and there are already a few different techniques and ideas for how to do this. Sometimes there are trade-offs involved, so maybe you can get better performance, but it means that you're talking to fewer of the nodes in the network, and that means that maybe you don't have quite as much security as you did if you were talking to all the nodes in the network, for example. So sometimes we can get better performance through these trade-offs. Sometimes people actually come up with new ideas that don't have trade-offs where we can get better performance. So it's still an active area.
Yeah, 1,000 transactions per second. I think Visa it does like 100 to 500,000 transactions per second or something. So it's like we need to, and that's always the classic number. People are like Bitcoin doesn't scale or whatever. It's like, and it would be tough to. Eventually, these things will need to do more than 1,000 transactions per second, and that would be the hope. So let's we're gonna chat once we come back about applying this EthicalOS to Libra, but we're gonna do that once after we do a break. So let's take a 10-minute break and then be back here at 4:30. Okay, so thank you. You're good. So everybody, we're gonna look at EthicalOS, and EthicalOS is a pretty nice. There's a bunch of different. If you look for tech ethics frameworks, there's a lot of different tech ethics frameworks, but EthicalOS is a nice tech ethics framework that was created by the Institute for the Future, which is like a group like this, and the Omidyar Network, which does tech ethics work by the old eBay co-founder. And so this checklist, there's like 8 different zones, and what the goal of this is that you look at a given technology and you say, hey, you go through each of the zones and you say, is this thing going to be good or bad for each of these questions that it has? And so what I want to do today is kind of both apply it to Libra, but also ask the question of, are there any additional zones or things that we would add to it? So to start, I think that so as people look at, everybody look at it for a second, and do people have instincts for which of these zones are most applicable or least applicable to Libra as a thing? And just say like, hey, I think blah, blah, blah is most applicable, or I think blah, blah, blah is least applicable.
Zone 3?
Zone 3 is applicable? Or it's not applicable? You said is applicable? Yeah, I generally agree. Yeah, the economic and asset. It says economic in the term, so it's like probably an asset inequalities. So I'm going to erase all of this. Yep, so I agree. Zone 3, what were you going to say?
Zone 2
It is not applicable. What does Zone 2
How
say?
can you get addicted to
Yeah, it's about the attention economy. It's like that's not really like that's a huge issue. It's like, but yeah. So most is like Zone 3, and then least maybe like Zone 2. I agree, not that applicable to others. Like Zone.
Zone 5, I think.
Yeah.
Applies. I think applies. Yeah.
Zone 7?
Zone 5 surveillance state. Yeah. So why does surveillance state apply actually?
Because now they know all the transactions are going to go through one queue. Everyone everywhere.
Yeah, it's like if you got the database, and the database now also has all the financial transactions on it, it's like going to be more surveilly than it was before. OCN would use.
I guess I think users really don't understand blockchain at all, and cryptocurrencies, and the implications of losing their money, and implications in general of using the technology. And so I'd say definitely Zone 7.
Zone 7, yeah, it's like the trust and user understanding. And when you think about, yeah, it's and blockchain systems are all about the levels of trust. Like, do you trust the protocol? Do you trust your wallet? Then do you trust the protocol? All these layers of trust, and then the user understanding where it's like, yeah, oh, here's your money, and then you're like, oh, sweet, I have my money. Oh, I forgot my password. And they're like, no, like you need to remember your private key. And then you're like, yeah, exactly. It's that caveat emptor idea.
So I'd also definitely suggest 6, but I also think there's a difference between Libra itself and Calibra and the intended use case of Libra, which I think is a lot more speculative, but also possibly important.
So why Zone 6, and also tell me about that differentiation you're making.
So I guess there's the question of how well is your pseudonymity preserved? What is the monitoring infrastructure surrounding Libra that's not built just into Libra itself, particularly with respect to like Calibra and the Know Your Clients, and also the intent that a lot of this is used over Facebook applications and within the Facebook market ecosystem.
Yeah, so yeah, Alex. What do you
Yeah,
say?
building off that, like Facebook makes a lot of money off ad revenue, and they will say, okay, you served an ad to this person that has these demographics, and then they clicked on the ad. Well, they don't actually know, did the person buy it? Like it's hard, or it's sometimes harder to make that last bit of the connection, but then they'll have that extra information.
Yeah, it's like if it's kind of connected to the risk zone 5, where it's like if Facebook's trying their best to be like it's not us, and it's like well, yeah, and they make these other claims about like oh maybe they won't have more of your data, but like if this is part of their big data engine, and then yes, they will be making money off of being able to serve better ads to you from that perspective.
I would say 8, which is hateful and criminal actors. So like people could be using Libra to fund kind of like might have malintention.
Yep.
I was also thinking, I don't know if this is possible, but like if they got a hold, like we talked about the use case where someone doesn't have a bank account but could just receive Libra, and maybe like some actor, if they got a hold of someone's public key, could just like start sending, if they knew they were getting in trouble, start sending Libra to random other accounts, and then like disperse that money, and so like more people would be brought into like a bad act. So I don't know if that would be a good use case, but
Yeah, and I think that in the macro point I super agree with, which is any kind of, and this is like the worry for people with something like Libra or with especially something like Bitcoin. It's like, oh man, it's going to be used for illegal activity. If you make a permissionless, decentralized system, then if you have something that's permissionless, then it will be hard to check those criminal actors. I think, and this is the goal of the Libra Wallet having something like KYC, is to be like, oh, if they do bad things, then we get them. What do people think about, I guess, number 1? Do people think number 1?
For the readings homework, I did pose an attack vector that I think is relevant to homework, to number 1.
Do you want to share it?
Yeah, sure. So you can imagine there is a cartel of businesses or one vendor with significant market power in a small country that doesn't actually have its assets in the Libra asset pool or in the Libra asset pool, and then they could try to use Libra as a tool to destabilize a government by destabilizing trust in its currency. It's a little out there, but maybe they could signal high inflation by listing their items in the local currency for a really high price, and then for the expected price in Libra, and that could be some form of disinformation and could maybe start inflation if they have enough market power in the area.
So if it was like a pair of socks, can we just like walk through that example?
Yeah, so the only way to, the major way to buy pairs of socks is on some mega version of Amazon in the small country you live in. And so this company lists the pair of socks for your expected Libra price, but they also list it at suddenly a very high price in the other currency. And since you're comparing these two currencies to each other, you're like, wow, there must be a lot of inflation in this other currency. And that being a signal to other vendors as well.
Yeah, I think that so the macro point here is like and I think so Alex's point is that you would be able to use disinformation and things like that to kind of mess around with, especially if you're a powerful digital actor, you might be able to mess around with the different prices of these things, or you might, if you wanted to, if you're someone like, let's give the stereotypical example, like if you're China and you want to destabilize Libra, you can do a lot of things that you might want to try to destabilize it. And so those are options. So.
Yeah, just to be clear, I don't think that's a very realistic attack vector. He had just asked, does anyone have a response to
No, I think that was really great to think about.
I thought it was just a fun thing.
And in general, I agree that Zone 1, I would put it in the not that applicable category. It's like most of Zone 1 is about, hey, if we think of the internet as to information, as blockchain is to value, number 1 is really about information. It's like, okay, now that we don't have now that press, newspapers don't, things go through Facebook or whatever, Russia's able to spend $20 million to send people ads. That's what Zone 1 is about, and so that's not really applicable to Libra stuff.
Oh, to Libra stuff.
Yeah, not applicable to Libra.
But of course, I mean, the reason I put my hand up is that there are blockchain solutions to this, right?
There are, exactly.
So,
yeah,
but that's not relevant. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the final one that we're looking at is Risk Zone 4. Do people think machine ethics and algorithmic biases? Yeah, geez.
I think it's not relevant unless you're looking at the large extended ecosystem, because this is almost certainly going to be used with respect to fraud markets and other things, but not directly relevant.
Yeah, that's my kind of instinct as well.
Well, so the oracles and might be AI, and there might be bias in the oracles.
Yeah, I think that there's.
To do what? Bias?
And to do whatever a smart contract does.
I think
we don't have smart contracts in Libra.
Libra will have a move smart contracting language, and it though at the beginning I think it will be non-Turing complete, so it won't be as fully fledged as something like Ethereum, but will be more fully fledged than something like Bitcoin in terms of the things, the operations that you can do in the network. I think Arn's point is a good one though, and but in general I agree that number 4 probably doesn't make that much sense. It's number 1 and number 2 are about the information economy and the ability to permissionlessly move information around the world. Number 4 is about AI specifically, essentially, where it's hey, and algorithmic biases and the idea that that if bad information in, then bad information out kind of stuff. So Arn has a good point there, where you can imagine you're trying to take in. You are an oracle, you are a thing that is trying to take stuff from the outside world and put it on the blockchain, and you can imagine a human doing it and being this is a fish, I'm going to put it on the blockchain. But you can also imagine an AI doing it and looking at the fish or looking at the face or whatever and trying to determine, does this count as it being on the blockchain? If in that situation, once you get the AI connection, then there could be issues. So so I agree with all this. Those are the most applicable, those are the least applicable. I think that the question that I want to ask now is, and let's actually do this as let's do this as a crew. So what do people think is missing from this EthicalOS? So when you think from a Libra perspective, when you think from a Libra perspective, what are the things where you're ooh, we should definitely be talking about this, but the EthicalOS doesn't actually have it?
there's I think like the systemic issues that like things that could just break society.
Yeah. Exactly. So systemic, and this is back to if we think about the financial ethics and the traditional financial regulation. One of those three buckets of traditional financial regulation is systemic risk, and it's like, yeah, that's not really a part of this, but it almost certainly should be. The other two that are there.
Just remember, there was a time when like little startups couldn't break the world, like back in the good old days.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, once Libra said, hey, we might do this thing, we have this like little white paper on the internet and like this piece of code that like really doesn't work at all, then like people were like, this is systemically relevant, like this could be, and so it was like, yeah, it was kind of, which is both maybe a triggered reaction, but is also true, where it's like, hey, if this thing hits, 1 billion plus users immediately, that thing is systemically important. Thinking about those other buckets of financial, traditional financial regulation, there's the one of tracking illicit transactions. Do we feel like that is already here or not here? Yeah, exactly. It's connected to, and I would want them to actually say this, which is risk zone 5, which is surveillance, and risk zone 8, which is the hateful and criminal actors. Those are kind of in tension with each other, right? Where it's like you have, so this is it does pretty much exist. Where like risk zone 8 is like, will the hateful actors use it? And like, so that's already we kind of have checked that box. But I would like them to kind of more explicitly state in this that like, hey, if you're trying to, there's this balance between surveilling everything so that hateful actors can't use it and just like allowing them to use it or whatever. So I would like 5 versus 8 or whatever, like surveil versus allow permissionless criminals or whatever. And then the third one, from a financial regulation perspective, is, what is the third? People know if there's tracking illicit activity, macro systemic risk. What's the third primary like financial regulation that people have? Securities. Yeah, is the security like investor and consumer protection? Is that part of this? No. Not really. It's kind of part of risk 7, this like user understanding piece. It's kind of, you could argue it's a part of like risk 2, this like the like attention economy piece. That like the whole like these systems are really just like speculation and stuff, and like but I would say that having something about, and the questions are like something like I want to add some kind of risk zone that says, hey, how, when you presented your offering to the world, were you in alignment with securities law, but were you also maybe trying to not just have it be to accredited investors, but maybe actually trying to make it some kind of crowdfunding thing or whatever. So I do think that there would be also asking questions like, what does your marketing material look like? If you are a company that goes out there and is like, hey, buy this thing, it's going to change the world. It's just a utility token. There might be some issues there. So I definitely think something in this investor protection, investor and consumer protection, and securities law is securities, and then like marketing. Yeah, I think there is something juicy there to be had.
There's another one which is kind of like, does your business model kind of naturally trend towards like something really bad? Like I would argue, there's been a whole slew of like payday, advanced lending, kinds of companies that are coming out, and some of them try to like they come at it with this really ethical, like, we're just going to help people, and people need this paycheck, they're paying all this extra money, and I look at them and I think like, you're going to become a payday lender, like there's a slippery slope, and you will end up being exactly the people that you think you're better than and stuff. And I wonder if there's, I don't know quite how to capture that, but it's sort of like, and also I wanted that about Libra, like even with the best and most honorable intentions now, does it end up being something, that's bad for society or something?
I think this is a great point. And I would add it as like something or like essentially mapping from like risk zone 2, which is about the attention economy, is something where it's kind of, especially in retrospect, it's easy to see where you look at something like, you look at the world, you look at Google and Facebook and these things, and you say, oh, if these things make money off of more data from people and more time from people, therefore you will have the attention economy, you will have dopamine triggers, you will have data extraction, all those things. The business model, it's the business model stupid, is what people say. And so it's not like anyone was unethical or not, it's just like the business model made Facebook into this bad thing that it is. And so my question, and I think Joe's posing it here, which is great, which is, what is the business model of something like Libra? Or if we expand to other kinds of cryptocurrencies, what kinds of business models, like what is the, if you think about from an inevitability perspective, from a slippery slope perspective, from an incentives perspective, what are those business models and should we be worried about them?
I think sorry, go ahead. You raised
No,
that.
Go ahead.
You go and then she'll go.
Okay, I was just saying about Tezos or Sai, I think they have the investor fund, so that's a business model. Investor fund or developer fund?
Yeah, so something like Tezos, I think this is, the business model-ish of something like Tezos or Ethereum is to create a bunch of tokens and then to get a bunch of people to use their platform, and then to have it be the case that there's enough desire to use their platform to pay for the gas or whatever on their platform, such that the tokens that they initially sold go up in value. And so I think that from a business model incentives perspective, the things that you would get worried about are things like ICOs, where then you say, oh boy, the incentives here are essentially to sell people snake oil and then maybe not build the thing. And so I think that's a possible worry, though I think there's a secondary question, which is, if that's like an initial worry of that business model, if you think about something like Ethereum now, it's like, what is, like if you think about the platform now and you think about people, like let's say a Joe Lubin type who already has a bunch of money or whatever, I'm not sure what the, if you think about the business model, which is he's just trying to increase the price of his ETH. And so I'm not sure if that leads to good or bad kind of things. Let's go to Alex.
I think that I think that one of the things they can sell are analytics, and they already have the ability to do that, but they have something that's really unique, which is profile information about people and their purchasing history. And even if they're only releasing aggregate or metrics about purchasing history, that is still really informative. And they can also become even more effective at advertisement targeting. And if they're the one helping serve the ads, then they're a better marketplace for ads.
Yep, I agree with that. I think that that's kind of essentially aligned with the existing worries around the attention economy business models, where you're like, okay, if Facebook wants to make more money, they're going to do it by selling more ads in general, and a way that they're going to do that is by getting more consumer behavior now in the world of financial stuff and bringing it as a part. Is that, am I hearing that?
Yeah, and like their metrics also only get better the more people use their platform, and if people are going to their platform to make purchases instead of, say, Amazon.com, then they have more people using their platform. And just to follow up on something you said earlier about how it might be a problem if someone goes to their local bank and they say, okay, I want to take out my like Swiss dollars, and the bank says, no, you can't do that. Well, that's a problem for the user, but it's not a problem for Facebook. So it does seem like there's this mismatch of incentives between Facebook and the users, because that would be great if now they're stuck in the Facebook platform.
Oh, can't get your money out.
Yeah.
Sorry. And that's why we're going to say the
So a couple of things that come to mind is, I know free basics for Facebook is something that they do, and they make money off of that via the telcos. So you can imagine that Calibra would be offered as a part of the free basics like suite, and so they would just have, so that would be a moneymaker. And then I don't know if I'm like remembering this correct, but also when people are transferring money, they had like a bunch of stuff saying like low fees, and so maybe there's just like money made off of fees from transferring money, but I don't know if they expect it to be free.
Yeah, and that gets into, and I think the macro piece here is, it's kind of weird. I think we should move away from business models in a second, but I think when people talk about like how to make money in the world of blockchain and cryptocurrency technology, it's not like, essentially the only way that people have made money on the internet thus far are with advertising and e-commerce. there's I guess I'd say three things: advertising, e-commerce, and then subscription as a like software as a service business models, where you buy your Photoshop or you buy your Spotify streaming or whatever. And I think that there are, and so this is just a big open question in general for the cryptocurrency world: is what do these business models eventually start to look like? Besides like printing money as a business model, and will they have? If there's something, if the business model is closer to like taking fees on transactions, then maybe that in general business models like that have been more incentive aligned than something where it's like, our goal, we're not actually going to take any fees, we're just going to add you as a part of our advertising attention economy ecosystem. That might be less aligned. Let's go, Dylan.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on, I was saying about advertising analytics. I think there's another dimension that's even interesting, this thing about things that were formerly informal. So exchanges on Facebook Marketplace or paying back a beer, things that you would traditionally do with Venmo, that it's not only what you're buying on Amazon or supplies for your pet, but you have these, what are formal behaviors. I could see it as well being like, if they could identify patterns of someone who's, say selling, pot, and then you can mark those transactions, and they sell that data set to law enforcement, saying, okay, here's the times in each city where these kinds of transactions are occurring. So formalizing these sorts of transactions, I think, is also something that could be very powerful, as something for them to make money off of.
Yeah, it is a scary thing. Let's do one from Jason, then we'll switch to a different topic.
I'm not entirely sure how it applies here, whether we should put it, but this is nothing about what if your technology fails, what are the implications, and especially what is your technology as control and surface with the real world. So like, does your car crash and a nuclear power plant blow up if you wrote your code wrong? Or do people lose access to all of their financial instruments if you didn't do this correctly, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of the things, I believe that they don't really have, there's like data risk zone 6 is kind of like this, where they say like, do you have a policy in place if like what happens to your customer data if it's like bought or sold down, if like what could happen if the data if it was stolen or leaked. So they kind of have it, but I think that could be, it's pretty crucial for the cryptocurrency world. It's like, okay, if Bitcoin is 51% attacked and like everybody who had their money now no longer has their money, or like the trust in the system goes down a bunch and like a bunch of people lose their money, or if you have a smart contract that you like were trusting your life savings in, there was a bug found. And so I think that thinking of it from the perspective of agricultural technology or like nuclear technology or rocket technology, of things like, if this is essentially security, where it's like you have the system, how can we make sure that the system is very secure, because the downsides are large because you're dealing with money. I would add also, by the way, that there's talking about this risk zone 1, so if we were just talking a lot about risk zone 2, which is about the business model and like how the existing internet business models have not been, especially the advertising attention economy of the business model hasn't been great for society, probably. And thinking about that in the blockchain world, how that's kind of confusing. For number 1, what I would say is, what number 1 is about is taking existing institutions that have existed and like how, and it's saying, hey, now those things are now pushed into the platform and have been decentralized in this weird permissionless way with the ecosystem, and so now we can do things like produce fake news. Now people like Russia, it's easier for them to kind of hamper our elections and things like that. And so I put risk zone 1 into this idea of this like institutional ethics or institutional co-evolution thing. And so what I would do is, if you try to map it into the blockchain world, the questions become things like, again, number 1 is all about information, but if you map it into the blockchain world, then you're saying things like, okay, now that you have, and this is longer term thoughts, but like if you have a world where more people are able to create their own kinds of money, where nation state fiat is not the main kind of money, where there's a bunch of different weird kinds of programmable money that exist, how will that change how people think about value, how people think about something that used to be just one-dimensional, centralized in an institution, now is this weird new decentralized world of value in this like weird networked way. Does that mapping make sense to people? Or no? Give me a thumbs up if that made sense, and a thumbs down if that makes sense, or something in between. Mostly halfway. The idea is that, and again, there's not, So I think of risk zone 1 as now that we have decentralized information ecosystems, the ideas of truth have been taken down in a way. If you take that idea and you put it into the world of blockchain, now you say, okay, now we have these decentralized value ecosystems, not just decentralized information ecosystems, but decentralized value ecosystems. Then people have there are new kinds of difficulties that start to arise. Things where people ask, like, what is valuable? You know, instead of like, what is true, was what it has been with the internet. Now it's like, what is valuable? What is value? It's been very simple for very long, which is like US dollars, that's what's valuable. And so I guess that is what I would add here, is that there's something where you kind of map zone 1 and you say, hey, zone 1 is part of this like institutional co-evolution picture where you have money being decentralized and value being more complicated, and the idea is centralized. Clear picture is now becoming this much less clear picture, and that has could have some long-term negative effects. So with that, let me think. I think we're pretty much at time. Let me think if there's anything else. Yeah, I would add. So there are others, and they are all, I'm going to now. So I would say, I don't think we need to go too deep into them. I'll share them with folks so that they can see, like, all that I did essentially was took this traditional mapping that this traditional categorization that we've had in the past, and just looked at it and said, okay, we essentially did this with financial ethics, where we looked at like, oh, they don't have macro systemic stability, so like we should add that in. And there are other examples of that, like this thing doesn't have anything about like climate change and like ignored externalities of these systems, and so that's part of this money as a primitive idea where you just have money, you just, oh boy, like let it do its thing. And then similarly, there's ones around on the tech ethics side as well as the institutional ethics side. So yeah, so with that, I think that the hope will be eventually there will be an EthicalOS that has all of those things that we just chatted about in addition to it, and that when new blockchain and cryptocurrency people start to create their new products, they will look at it and they will say, how can I be good for society? And then we will have taught them how to be good for society. Yeah, so I think that's the end of today's class.